Heaven Official's Blessing. Tian Guan Ci Fu by Mo Xiang Tong Xiu. Read by Plant Bones. Chapter 17. Paradise to Ashes. The Second Coming of Fang Xin. Xialian didn't expect Xie Qingxuan to so suddenly light a fire, and he didn't even have the time to stop him before it was too late. The flames were exceedingly bright and revealed the silhouette of a black-clad man. The man in black had his head hung low against the stone wall at the end of the path, his face white as a sheet, his black hair a mess, but underneath that unkempt appearance was an expression that shone with determination and a gaze burning like ice. Although he sat cross-legged without a trace of discomfort, the stench of blood was thick in the air. He was clearly gravely wounded and was obviously imprisoned here. I have nothing to say, was probably him mistaking them for interrogators. Xie Qingxuan saw his face and cried out, "It's you!" That man didn't seem to expect a guess and was taken aback. He looked as though he wanted to say, "It's you as well," but alas, he held back. Xialian calmed Rue, who was ready to attack. "So, you two know each other?" After crossing so many hurdles and finally finding someone, Xie Qingxuan looked relieved. He was about to respond when the man cut in. He said in a tone that left no room for dispute, "No." Xie Qingxuan raged at those words and pointed at him with his fan. "Is it so shameful to know me? What hurtful words, Mingxiang! I'm your best friend!" The man denied it resolutely. "I have no friends who would run around in that sort of attire." Xie Qingxuan was still in his tattered purple silk dress. Truly a shameful sight. Xialian wanted to laugh at the thought that there were really people in the world who would claim to be someone's best friend to validate themselves. It was definitely Xie Qingxuan's style, but Mingxiang? If he had remembered the 5 elemental masters correctly, the Earth Master's name was Mingyi. Xialian spoke up. "Are you perhaps Lord Earthmaster?" "It's him. You've met before," Xie Qingxuan replied. Xialian looked Mingyi over and wondered. "Have we?" He didn't recall ever meeting such a character. "You have?" "We have not," Mingyi asserted. "Yes, you have," Xie Qingxuan said exasperatedly. "Before, at Baiyue Pass. You guys didn't forget that fast, did you?" Seeing Mingyi's face go from ghastly pale to ashen grim, Xialian finally remembered. When they first met at Baiyue Pass, wasn't there a black-clad lady with Xie Qingxuan? Huatiang had told him at the time that the black-clad person wasn't the Water Master, but was surely one of the 5 elemental masters. As expected, Xie Qingxuan was not only passionate about transforming into his own female form, he was also passionate about dragging others into doing the same. No wonder the black-clad lady looked extremely pissed off at the time, like she was disgusted. Recalling now, Xie Qingxuan tried to wheedle him into joining in the fun. Xialian realized that it'd truly been a close call and was glad he didn't give in. "Lord Earthmaster, are you the one who sent forth the ascending fire dragon?" Xialian asked. "I was," Mingyi answered. They had found the right person. Xialian nodded and said, "Lord Earthmaster is probably seriously wounded. We'd best make our escape now and talk later." Without any prompting, Xie Qingxuan knelt down and lifted Mingyi onto his back. "Then let's get out of here." The 3 retraced their steps, and Xie Qingxuan talked as he walked. "I have to ask, Mingxiang, are you good at fighting? You were perfectly fine back at Baiyue Pass, so how did you get beaten up this bad in a matter of days? How did you piss off that Crimson Rainsod flower?" There's a bit of schadenfreude into his tone. Xialian mentally noted. He's speaking as though he isn't afraid of being punched. They really are good friends. Mingyi looked like he'd had enough of listening to Xie Qingxuan talk and spat. "Shut up." But this was also a question Xialian wanted the answer to, so he adjusted his wording. Lord Earthmaster, why would Hua Tong give you trouble? Mingyi didn't tell him to shut up, but he didn't answer either. Xiaolian turned his head and looked at him, and he saw his eyes had closed. After days of imprisonment, interrogation, and being so badly wounded, Mingyi must have felt so relieved by their sudden rescue that he could finally relax. His questions weren't urgent anyways, so Xiaolian didn't try to wake him. The three ran up to the stairs, and Xiaolian fished out his dice and rolled once more. He didn't know what number he'd rolled out in the dark, but only that before them he heard a soft clack. A crack peeked open and light seeped through. Xiaolian pushed at the door and was just wondering whether he'd have the chance to take Lang Ying away too, when unexpectedly the first step he took was hollow. The moment he felt himself fall forward, he cried, "Don't come out!" Xiaolian somersaulted through the air and fell on something hard. He felt brief relief that it wasn't a bladed mountain or a sea of fire that he'd fallen into, until he looked up and realized that a bladed mountain or a sea of fire might have been better. Hua Tong's exceptionally handsome face was only inches away from his brows raised high and his gaze locked on him. When the stone door opened this time, it dumped him directly on top of Hua Tong. He'd fallen into the armory. At the moment, Hua Tong was sitting on the grand chair of the armory, composedly wiping the scimitar Ming. Even when someone suddenly fell into his lap from above, he'd only moved his hands away and stopped cleaning without any air of surprise. He gazed calmly at Xiaolian, as if waiting for an explanation. Of course, Xiaolian had none and could only lie in his lap and stare back boldly. Suddenly, he saw another person at the periphery of his vision, and when he turned, he saw it was Lang Ying. That bandaged boy was sitting on the floor looking terrified. In fact, his hands were clutching at his head while he stared at the two of them. Why was Lang Ying here too? It looked like Hua Tong was interrogating him? But when Xiaolian peered upward, he saw half of Sitting Xuan's white boot stepping over the void. There wasn't time to think, and Xiaolian quickly gripped Hua Tong's shoulders. "I'm sorry," Xiaolian cried, and tackled Hua Tong. This tackle shoved Hua Tong a few meters away, and he even tumbled a couple of times before he found his footing. By then, Sitting Xuan, with Mingyi still on his back, had already jumped and landed with ease in the same spot Hua Tong had just been hitting. Xiaolian forced himself to look back, and Hua Tong was still looking at him without a word, but that one corked brow was now arched even higher. Xiaolian leapt to his feet and backed off a few feet, apologizing as he did so. I'm sorry. Lang Ying stared at Hua Tong, seeming extremely frightened, and rushed towards Xiaolian to hide behind him. Xiaolian shielded him and said, "San Lang, allow me to explain." I'm waiting," Hua Tong responded. "Oh, wait, shouldn't it be the opposite?" Sitting Xuan spoke up. "He should be the one who owes you an explanation. He's the one responsible for the missing heavenly official. Be wary, Your Highness." This was exactly the situation Xiaolian didn't want to face. He looked at Hua Tong intently. "San Lang, I don't know what misunderstanding occurred between you and Lord Earthmaster, but why don't we talk this out peacefully?" The best-case scenario would be Hua Tong letting them go without harm. Although the Earthmaster was wounded, his life was not in danger, and he wasn't missing any limbs. If he dropped the matter, this wouldn't need to escalate. If Hua Tong let them leave, then when they report back to the heavens, Xiaolian would do anything to beg Jingwu for mercy, heedless of his own honor. Unexpectedly, however, Hua Tong asked, "Earthmaster? What Earthmaster?" After a pause, he continued, "Oh, did you mean the one on Windmaster's back? He's nothing more than an inept subordinate of mine." Both Xiaolian and Sitting Xuan were taken aback at this. "He's obviously one of the heavenly officials. Dare you say otherwise?" Hua Tong laughed. Then I wonder why your honorable heavenly official would conceal his identity, leave behind his respectable title, and come work as an officer under me. Hotong drew out his scimitar, and a silvery crescent moon flashed that followed Ming's curve. If that's genuinely the Earthmaster, then what commendable patience to put on an act for 10 years. In the past decade, I have not thought him suspicious from time to time, but there was never any proof. If I hadn't spotted him traveling alongside Windmaster and Baiyue, I'd still be in doubt. In a split second, Xielian understood everything. So that's what happened. As it turned out, the reason Earthmaster had gone missing and been imprisoned was ultimately because he had gone undercover and concealed his true identity for a decade to serve as a ghost officer under Huatong. To be blunt, he was a spy. Once in a while, Huatong would think his subordinate's actions were suspect, but without concrete evidence, he'd just keep him under observation, and it was only recently that Huatong uncovered the Earthmaster's deception. During their journey to Baiyue Pass, Huatong had seen the Earthmaster next to the Windmaster. Even disguised as a woman, with thanks to the Windmaster, Huatong still saw through that fake skin. He discovered the black-clad lady was the ghost officer he suspected, and locked on to his identity as one of the 5 elemental masters. After the Baiyue case was over, Huatong probably left Puzi's shrine to settle his score with the Earthmaster. It may have been during that deadly pursuit in dire circumstances that Mingyi set off the distress signal. Then Zhenwu summoned Xielian and gave him the mission to launch this rescue. That heavenly official failed to mind his duties and instead went undercover in the ghost realm over a decade was quite the scandal. Never mind the politics behind it. If Mingyi was to remain imprisoned and tortured, all heaven would break loose if he actually died at Huatong's hands. The world would be gripped by absolute chaos. If that day came, no one would be spared. After thinking all this through, Xielian could only say, I understand that the fault is ours, but Sanlang, I still hope you will let us go this time around. Huatong watched him intently. Then after a moment he said quietly, Your Highness, some things are best not to get involved in overmuch. Suddenly, Shiting Xuan cried from the side, Wind, come to me! The moment the fan came out, wild gusts started blowing through the armory. The weapons in the walls and the shelves began to rattle, humming and moaning. Lord Windmaster, we haven't done anything yet. Xielian was bewildered. I don't think either of you are going to make a move first, Shiting Xuan said. So I'll be the bad guy. Wind, come to me! There was an enormous cracking sound, and Xielian could feel clumps of dust falling from above on his head. He looked up and saw that one side of the roof was being raised by the gusts, breaking at the seams and forming a large fissure. The armory had no windows or other visible exits, so Shiting Xuan's intention was not to fight, but rather escape through a crack in the roof. Within the crazed gale, Huatong's raven-black hair and maple-red clothes whipped wildly, but the man himself remained utterly unmoved. He smirked. You have a fan, and coincidentally, so do I. Huatong retrieved a fan from one of the armory shelves. It was small and intricate, its spine and leaf made of pure gold, serene and beautiful. Huatong twirled it in his hand and then snapped it open. He grinned wordlessly, elegance suffusing his murderous aura. He flipped his hand and fanned, and a strong gust shot toward them with a blinding silver flash. The 3 dodged and heard behind them the sound of hail-like darts battering the walls and ground. When they turned their heads to look, row upon row of long strips of golden foil were nailed into the ground. Each piece was thin but deeply embedded, its sharpness and viciousness clear. Every weapon inside the armory was a spiritual one, and any one he grabbed at random possessed equally murderous potential. Huatang flipped his hand again, and another gold-foiled gust blew. The winds called forth by Sitting Xuan were strong, but the stronger they were, the more dangerous the situation became. The armory was only a hall, and its space was limited. The winds raised by the Windmaster's fan would rebound around the interior and blow the golden foil whirling around them, dancing in its madness. Xiaolian was afraid the golden foil would harm them, so he shielded Lang Ying and cried, "Lord Windmaster, please stop for now." The golden foil whirled closely around Sitting Xuan and Ming Yi. Sitting Xuan wanted to stop as well, but the roof had been raised by his winds, revealing a crack. If he stopped now, all his efforts would go to waste. Just then, the gold sheets encircling them suddenly flew upward all at once. There was a cacophony of clinking and clanging. Then a person broke through the roof and leapt down, accompanied by showers of debris and dust. The moment he landed, the person shouted, "Lord Windmaster, I apologize, but I can't sit still any longer." Sitting Xuan was overjoyed. "Tian Xiu, you've come just in the nick of time." The young man carried a great sword, its blade as wide as a grown man's palm. It was indeed Lang Xiu. His great sword was shimmering gold, but at a closer look it wasn't because the sword was golden, but because it had sucked up all the golden foil. They overlapped and covered the entirety of the blade, making it look as if it were a massive sword forged of gold. Lang Xiu's greatsword was forged from a curious metal born of a lodestone mountain, and it had the amazing ability to magnetize and attract metal. As long as the opposing spiritual weapon did not exceed a certain level of spiritual power, once he gripped the hilt, he could mentally incite its ability and pull all the surrounding metals, absorbing them into its blade. Sure enough, soon the layer of gold foil was sucked into the sword, the gold disappearing completely. At this sight, Huatang laughed out loud, closed his fan, and tossed it away behind him. Are the heavenly officials so pathetically poor that once they see gold, they can't let it go? If those words were directed at Xiaolian, he would have pretended not to have heard them, but they were directed at Lang Xiu, a noble born of royalty. He hadn't cared for riches his entire life, and although he knew the enemy was intentionally taunting him, he was provoked into a boiling rage. He raised his sword with both hands and lunged at Huatang. Huatang drew his scimitar with one hand, twirling silver shimmers in the air, and calmly prepared to face the attack head-on. Lang Xiu's strike used all of his power. He was like a newborn bull unafraid of a tiger, but Xiaolian could already see the difference in their ability. If the strike landed, it would mean certain death. On the sidelines, even Sitting Xuan, who couldn't deduce any such difference, watched with jittery alarm. He yelled, "Tian Qiu, don't!" But at such a precarious moment, how could a mere shout stop the arrow that was nocked and ready to shoot? Unexpectedly, just when scimitar and sword were about to clash, a blinding white light exploded within the armory. It was a light so immense that it enveloped the entirety of the armory, and everyone temporarily lost their sight. All they could see was glaring white. Xiaolian, however, was prepared and could see with some difficulty. He gathered all the powers he borrowed from Sitting Xuan in his right hand and transformed the energy to a giant flame before shooting it. A corner of the armory was immediately set ablaze. Soon after, Xiaolian released Rue and tied himself, Sitting Xuan, Ming Yi, Lang Xiu, and Lang Ying together. He shouted, "Lord Windmaster, blow us upwards." Even though Sitting Xuan couldn't open his eyes, he still followed Xiaolian's directions. He raised the fan and snapped it downward. A violent twister formed on the flat ground, blowing toward the ceiling, and at last broke through the crumbling roof. Rue had the 5 of them tied in a bundle and flew straight into the sky. In mid-air, their sight finally returned to them, and Xuan could see that heavy in the air, the armory was on fire. Afraid that Huatong would give chase, he flapped his fan. Now that he was truly fanning the flames, the blaze instantly erupted in size from the wild gust. Then the embers landed on all the nearby buildings. Now over half of Paradise Manor was ablaze in a field of red. With great difficulty, Xialian finally grabbed hold of Xuan, who was fanning with all his might. "Lord Windmaster, please stop fanning. The whole place is going to burn down." Startled, Xuan cried, all right, I'm stopping. Let me go, Your Highness, your grip is too strong." It wasn't until the master stopped his winds that Xialian let go. He looked down, and amidst the red flames, Xialian still spotted that crimson silhouette. They were too high in the sky and couldn't see clearly, but his gut instinct told him that moment Huatong was standing there watching him. He didn't give chase, nor did he put out the flames. He only stood there, letting the wild fire devour capriciously. Outside Paradise Manor, screams and howls roared from all over Ghost City's streets, and crowds of ghosts ran amok. Xialian couldn't breathe. His voice had gone hoarse, and he mumbled to himself, I only wanted to start a small fire to create a distraction. How did it turn out like this?" It was only a little earlier when Huatong had leaned against the doors of that armory, half-jokingly telling him he wanted to give him the entire armory and every weapon inside. But now everything was engulfed in a sea of fire. Although there might be many weapons made of true gold and feared no fire, there were surely also many that could not withstand the flames. After all this burning, many treasures would be reduced to ash. Xialian had not expected the flames to grow so violently, devouring all of Paradise Manor. Even if Huatong didn't consider it a home, it was still his residence. Seeing how crushed Xialian was, Xuan also began to feel bad. I'm really sorry. Your Highness, I didn't think things through. I only wanted to escape faster. This is all my fault. It was definitely only a small flame at first. If Crimson Rainsoft Flower comes knocking for payback, you just tell him to come to me. Don't worry, I'll pay whatever amount. Money is never an issue. But money definitely was not the issue. Xialian closed his eyes, unable to speak. Xuan patted his shoulder in consolation, but suddenly felt wetness on his fingertips and smelled a strange, dark stench of blood. He turned his head to look, and his face lost color in alarm. Your Highness! What happened to your hand? Xialian's right hand, and everything traveling up from it, was covered in blood. His entire right arm was thoroughly dyed red, and the shaking that racked the limb could not be written off as a minor issue. Yet both his hands still firmly gripped the white silk band to keep everyone from being blown apart by wild winds. What happened to you? Xuan cried. Xialian came back to his senses a little and shook his head. It's nothing. Just a small injury. I'll be fine once we're back up there. That white light was you? Xuan remembered. Your Highness, you broke those two apart? I'm a swordsman, after all, Xialian replied. Xuan had guessed right. At the moment right before Huatong and Lang Tinchou's blades had clashed, Xialian darted in. He'd randomly taken a sword from the stacks of weapons on the shelves and made two particular moves between the sword and scimitar. In the first move, he knocked away Lang Tinchou's greatsword. In the second, he blocked the scimitar of Ming. The strength of those two moves was not only powerful, but extremely precisely controlled. Even when Xialian blocked both blades, the force from the strikes did not rebound onto the attackers. This was because, with Xialian sandwiched in the middle, he'd used his own sword and arm to absorb both attacks completely. Lang Tinchou's greatsword was manageable, but Huatong's scimitar was a force to be reckoned with. The sword Xie Lian had used was one from Hua Tang's collection, so naturally it was also a formidable blade. When those two blades crossed, it blasted that blinding white light. With the two moves, the first strike against Lang Tianqiu's great sword caused a crack in Xie Lian's sword, and the second strike against the scimitar Ming shattered it to pieces. All this was done within a fraction of a second, faster than the eye could see. Xie Qingxuan looked at the tragic state of Xie Lian's right hand and determined the whole right arm was probably badly mangled. He said, "Your Highness, you're so full of vigor. I can't believe you blocked them single-handedly." The flower-crowned martial god, sword in one hand, flower in the other. Xie Qingxuan had only remembered the flower. He had forgotten that Xie Lian had ascended because of the sword. Thinking back on how close a call that was, Xie Qingxuan's heart was still racing. Thank goodness your Highness had those moves. Otherwise, who knows how many pieces Lang Tianqiu would have been cut into by Hua Tang. The strange thing was, Lang Tianqiu appeared to be unharmed, but he remained in a stunned state, like his soul had left his body. "Tianqiu?" Xie Qingxuan called. "Tianqiu, are you all right? Wake up! What's wrong with you? Has your sight not returned yet?" Riding on a tailwind, the group finally reached the heavenly capital. Dragging and carrying, they rushed past the ascension gates and ran straight for the Palace of Divine Might. Since Lang Ying couldn't enter the palace, Xie Lian settled him in a small side chamber. No one seemed to be on duty, so he shouted within the communication array, "Are there any fellow heavenly officials here? Please, everyone come quickly to the Palace of Divine Might. It's an urgent emergency. We have a wounded official." As he shouted, Xie Qingxuan snapped his fingers and switched back to his white Taoist robes. He waved and released 100,000 merits. "It's 2 wounded officials." Xie Lian said hurriedly, "Lord Windmaster, don't get so excited. We can ask normally. There's no need to distribute any merits. Everyone will naturally come once they hear us." "No, Your Highness," Xie Qingxuan said. "You have to know. Giving out merits works 100 times faster than asking alone." Soon enough, a voice came from the distance. "Who's wounded?" When the word "who" was uttered, the voice was still far away. But by the end of the question, the person had appeared. Feng Xin. He entered the hall, looked at Xie Lian and then at Lang Tianqiu, his face faltering. "I'm fine, but the Lord Earthmaster seems to be badly wounded," Xie Lian said. After a moment of silence, Feng Xin asked, "What happened to your right arm?" "So what if he's injured?" Another voice came. "There are so many heavenly officials, and who among us has ever returned unscathed after a patrol?" The voice was decorous and mellow, but the words were unpleasant. It was, of course, Mu Tsing. He crossed into the great hall, and also took a look at Xie Lian, then at Lang Tianqiu, yet the face he made was the opposite of Feng Xin. He merely arched his brows slightly, looking as if he was ready to catch a good show. Seeing how Feng Xin moved to check on Xie Lian's arm, he bent down to check on Ming Yi. He said, "So this is the Earthmaster." During that exchange, a number of heavenly officials poured into the hall, one after another. Earthmaster Ming Yi had always been inconspicuous and stayed out of sight, so for many this was the first time they'd ever seen him in person. And they bunched around him, staring at him with great interest. The masses were mostly confused, not knowing why they were gathering at the Palace of Divine Might, but having collected the Windmaster's merits, they had to come and check it out. "Thanks, but I'm all right. Leave it and it'll recover on its own," Xie Lian said to Feng Xin. Feng Xin didn't mince his words. "Take care of yourself." Xie Lian uttered another soft thanks, but when he turned around, Lang Tianqiu was staring at him with a dazed look. "Your Highness Taihua, what's the matter?" Feng Xin also noticed something off about Lang Tianqiu and questioned, "Was His Highness Taihua also injured somewhere?" "I don't think so. Let me see," Xie Lian said, and extended his hand. He reached for Lang Tianqiu's brow. Yet unexpectedly, with his quick eyes and deft hand, Lang Tianqiu seized Xia Lian's wrist. There was still some hesitation on Lang Tianqiu's face, as if he had discovered something, but wasn't sure. However, there was already fire burning in his eyes. Xia Lian felt the trembling rage pass from Lang Tianqiu's arm into his. Now all that speculating officials had noticed the unusual situation and started whispering amongst themselves. Xie Qingxuan and Mu Qing both began to rise, and Feng Xin also asked, "Your Highness Taihua, what are you doing?" Lang Tianqiu finally moved his lips. He only uttered 2 words, but Xia Lian's heart sank all the way to the very bottom. "State Preceptor?" Lang Tianqiu said through gritted teeth. Xia Lian's pupils contracted slightly. The onlooking heavenly officials muttered, half guessing, half confused. What state preceptor? Who's the state preceptor? Some were more astute and immediately figured it out. Lang Tianqiu was the crown prince of Yong'an, and the state preceptor of Yong'an during his time was the second of the dual evil masters, the state preceptor Feng Xin. No one knew his origin or his background, yet this moment Lang Tianqiu had Xia Lian in his grip and called him state preceptor. Does this mean that Xia Lian was the evil cultivator who brought ruin to Yong'an? The state preceptor Feng Xin? However, Xia Lian was the crown prince of Xianle. The kingdom of Xianle had fallen at the hands of the kingdom of Yong'an, so why would he become the state preceptor of Yong'an? His Highness Taihua was renowned in the upper court for his optimism and cheerfulness. He was never calculating, nor did he make things difficult for anyone, and he had never before shown such an expression, half despair, half rage, half enmity, half hatred. Lang Tianqiu had Xia Lian in a death grip, his breathing growing harsher, and finally in a strained voice, I killed you with my own 2 hands, sealed you in that coffin myself. You, state preceptor, you certainly are remarkable. Heavens would appear that something big was about to go down today.